Okay, well, welcome everyone. Today is the next restorative practice in our series. This is affective language. And today we're going to talk about what affective language is. When you look at the spectrum, all the different skills and things that you could do, practices that you could put in place in your school, affective language is one of the less intense, less intrusive, and it's very informal. It's really just the way we talk. And so that's kind of that basis. It's really one of those formative things, though, in terms of looking at how do people talk to each other at your school? Is this a restorative school or not? So we'd be looking for community building circles in the classroom. How do people talk when there's emotion? And that's what affect is. It's the psychology term to affect. And then we go on to then solving problems when problems occur with restorative chats, circles, conflict mediation, and then conferences. And so through this series, we're walking through each of these skills. And these aren't necessarily what everyone calls them. These are what I call these things. They have different names, but I'll share what they are. That way you can kind of figure out where they land and things that you've already read or things that you already do. So before we dive into skill, just a review on what are restorative practices. In schools, we're really looking at building community, setting a foundation with community building circles so that when things go south, which they will, because anytime you get a big group of kids in there and lots of staff people in the whole area, you're going to have conflict, you're going to have relationships, you're going to have issues. When those things happen, be able to respond in a way that is authentic and sincere and effective. And we're really looking at listening to people, coming to understanding, and then making things right. A lot of it's based, among other theories, but on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's from our child development classes that many of us took in college. That really what we're looking at, every human being needs their physiological needs met and safety and security needs met. And before they can get to that self-actualization place where all students need to be to learn, that's where teachers are asked to make kids do things that are creative and collaborative and achieving their potential, and they're not able to do that unless other needs are met. So we want safety needs met and belongingness and love, relationships, friends. Those things come, restorative practices comes there in that yellow kind of zone. And just recently I was seeing on Facebook and things going around a circle. Someone actually had this little pyramid and had circled the bottom saying safety, physiological needs, that's where we all are right now. And we're not able to get to that other place. And I have that. I have teachers talking about kids not logging in and they're worried about their safety. And we have families that can't pay their rent right now. And they're not so worried about getting their kids to log in and talk to their teachers. And so we're really at kind of that basic need right now. And what we're trying to do is build the belongingness and love to draw kids into relationships that are safe, even virtually. And that's quite the challenge right now. But that's we're up for that as educators. We're innovative people. So that's what we're working on now. And so the research is so clear that one of the most important things in a school is the relationships between teachers and students. For a long time, we knew that student well-being was really influenced by teacher stress or the teacher's sense of well-being, and that teachers were affected by things like student behavior or lack of respect. They've things like that in the research. But whenever they would do interviews talking to people that stayed in education, they always said one thing, and it was my kids. I would miss my kids. They love their relationships with their students. So if that's the number one thing to people in this difficult, challenging profession, we need to figure out why some people have an okay time making these relations and other people really struggle. And how can even people that are naturals have better relationships with all their students, not just some. So restorative practices is kind of the science of relationships. And so if you have great relationships with students, you're going to see higher academic achievement, their attendance and grades. It gets better. In fact, people that do community building circles have very, very few problem behaviors. And when they do, they tend to talk about it as a class in a circle. Of course, dropout would reduce, and then you'd have a reduction in anxiety for both teachers and students. So that's the exciting stuff. Review on the social discipline window. So what we're talking about now is how we speak, really, about the things we say and the things we ask. So we could be really controlling with the way we talk, or we could be super supportive, or we could be a little bit of both. So when we are not controlling and not supportive, that's a little bit lax. We're neglectful. We don't communicate to the kids with that. 4, this is doing things for them, making excuses, maybe making assumptions about how they feel or what they think. And then 2, so this is how I can be sometimes when I get very bossy with my children. Do this, do that, they resist, or I see it as arguing when they're to explain, and I don't leave room for that, right? That would be 2. And where we want to land when we communicate with our students and each other at work is with. So really seeking to understand, how are they feeling? Why are they doing what they're doing? And learning from them. And that would be how we're talking about affective language, the way we communicate. So with restorative, we're doing things with the students. We're very, we're strict but fair. We're fun, but it's a controlled thing. High expectations. And part of that would be that if kids aren't participating, we still hold them accountable, but we understand why, right? We're nurturing, fair and consistent, and we're always seeking to understand. So affective language, it's both the things we say in statements and it's questions. The statements we're really looking at expressing the way that we feel. Affective is a term that I learned in my social work program. It's a psychology term, and it just means it's another word for emotion, really. We would say someone has a flat affect if they're not showing emotion. It's how we demonstrate emotion. And that's where that term came from. Some people think it means, oh, it's how you're affected by someone, and that's not what it is. Questions, when we talk about affective questions, they're questions that we can ask in a certain way that don't assign blame and shame, but they solve a lot of problems. It's actually rather efficient way. And then it focuses on met needs or unmet needs. And I'm going to give some powerful examples of how that works. So for statements, it's really how you express your feelings. And often it's in response, generally, by someone else's behavior, good or bad. So that would be your student is talking in class, and that makes you feel a certain way, right? And so being able to express your feelings is very humanizing. However, most teachers went through teacher school being told, don't express any emotion. You have to be fair and neutral and always in control, right? But when we express our feelings, we can do it in a way that is professional and we're not shaming or blaming kids or people. And the key is really focusing on what the needs are. What's the need of the community? What do you need to feel competent in your work? And so thinking about that, how it affects your needs. So the questions are things I think many people are familiar with. The restorative questions, they're also called affective questions, but they seek to repair harm. They're the problem-solving questions that maybe you've seen, that by asking them and walking that process, you can heal relationships. And again, they don't blame or shame people, but they promote responsibility and ownership for, like, looking at how did I impact other people in the thing that I did. Again, met or unmet needs. The cool thing about restorative questions is they are asked both to the person that did harm and the person that was harmed. I'm going to show them to you. We're not going to spend a lot of time, but I want you to say, hey, I recognize that. So these are IIRP, the International Institute of Restorative Practices. They have published these questions. They're the most common that you see out there. And they were brought over from New Zealand, from some tribal communities, because it was how they solved questions. And really, I think I've talked to an African woman. She said in her tribe, back home in Africa, similar questions were asked in the community when problems happened. So this set of questions are for the person that did they have the challenging behavior. And the second set are for the person who was harmed. And I don't know about you, but when I think back when I was in school and when I was younger and I was harmed, I was left totally in the dark with what happened to that person when I reported it. I remember one time in high school, a girl stole my creative writing story and turned it in as her own. And I found out about it and reported it. And I lost a whole group of friends, and I never heard anything. I just got iced out. I never had a face-to-face with her. And I can name lots of examples, and so can you, because traditional discipline, we don't talk to the victim. In fact, even if there's like a court case, all they're allowed to do is just sit there like an observer when they were the one that was harmed. So restorative practice handles things very differently, and you're going to find out how that works as we go deeper and deeper into this. But today we're just talking mainly about the statements, because in order to get to the questions and do a good job with that, you're going to need to be modeling a lot of good things with your kids in terms of talking about feelings. Because if we can use affective language, we're going to create a really safe environment that we could express even intense emotions. That kids that are very upset are going to be able to feel safe and express their emotions. They're not going to be defensive when you ask questions. They're not going to be afraid of you and feel the need to lie. And you're going to be modeling like an emotional vocabulary. They're going to see you calm down. And then it also, affective language really promotes equity, because no matter who is causing the harm, we're going to ask the same questions. No matter who gets harmed, they get asked the same questions. And that's justice, right? It doesn't matter if you're on my last nerve, you still have a right to go through this process, right? And it's more efficient because we're not making excuses. People get to the point and solve the problem. And the last point I think is the most important lately to me and of interest to me is teacher well-being. I have been reflecting on the idea that, traditional school discipline, it's supposed to be like Lady Justice, blind, to, doling out consequences in a very fair way. There's no room for emotion, right? It's justice when we dole out consequences and punishments. What someone deserves, that's what they get, right? However, most of the behavior that we see in schools harms someone, right? And often it was the teacher. Often the talking back or the comment. And then as the kids get even older, it can be more extreme. Those kind of behaviors, either the low level, continual things, or the interface, cussing you out, it hurts. Teachers are here because they like kids. And when those relationships don't go well, it hurts. And sometimes they feel scared. Sometimes they feel mad. Sometimes they go home and tell their partner and their partner gets upset. It's really tough. And so we ask teachers all the time to have no emotions about these things. They always have to keep a lid on it. They have to be very neutral. And yet they're not, they're harmed. And so what affective language could do it could allow a teacher to respectfully and professionally express that their feelings were hurt to a student directly and actually have resolution. It's possible. So that's what we want to talk about. So what affective statement is not, and this might be what you're thinking, and this could happen if people aren't kind of being professional and in control of themselves. We're not talking about guilt tripping people or manipulating people with our emotions. You are not demeaning them. It's typically not public. We're talking about heart-to-hearts with a kid that you're going to pull aside and you're going to talk about how they're feeling and what they're doing and how you're feeling and what you're doing. We're also not talking about you being emotional. We're talking about you expressing feelings in a way that they can hear. So it's actually not going to be an emotional affect, because if adults get emotional kids and they see that, it can trigger certain kids, particularly kids that have experienced trauma. If you're saying, I feel really angry, and you look really angry, they could shut down and worse, right? Fight, flight, freeze. So we don't want to be igniting a trauma response. We have to do this in a safe way, and you also need to know your students. And you want to also, we're not saying share every thought and feeling, so you still need appropriate boundaries. We're not talking about your boyfriend. We're not talking about a lot of private things or private emotions. It's really thinking about what would be helpful right now. An appropriate thing, is this stop or not? And we don't only share negative emotions. I like to say, spend 90% of your time expressing the positive. And even when you correct kids' behavior, I tend to not like to talk a lot. I like to keep all the language for the good stuff and make quick, short corrections. But if it's time to have a heart-to-heart, let's talk about how you could do that. So this was up in my office for years, and as a school social worker, school counselor, and I got it when I was an intern from the counselor that trained me in a high school. And he had this up in the office, and some of you have seen this. Before you decide to do any of what we're going to talk about, think, is this true? Is it going to be helpful? Is it important to say? Necessary to say? And is it kind? So this is not something, you're not going to have a heart-to-heart with the student without deciding, let me try this, might help. So there's some nice neuropsychology behind what we're talking about right now. That science says the quickest way to calm someone down when they're upset is to validate them. Reflect a feeling. You seem upset right now, right? Are you upset? Let them tell you how they feel. Ask them, right? And then you can say, I would be frustrated too. I've done that with upset parents. It calms them really down, like they're ready to now listen, but people are not going to listen to us until we've listened to them when they're upset typically. And then the quickest way to build empathy in someone is actually to tell a story. And I think that's so interesting. So that's why a lot of really great speakers are storytellers. And parables work, right? That's how we learn the best. I always perk up when someone's going to tell a story. So the quickest way to build empathy is to tell a story. Have you ever noticed that when you hear the story of one of your students, all of a sudden all kinds of empathy for them? You didn't have any information before. They were acting the fool in your class, driving you crazy, and then somebody tells you, did you know that dad just went to prison, right? Did you know that his sibling died last year? Everything changes, right? Because we know the story. So restorative practices, when you go and answer those questions, you hear the story. So really, restorative practices, affective language, affective statements and questions are tapping into some neuropsychology that works. So there are several different ways to do, to use affective statements, where you use some words to how you feel. And it can be informal, that's fine. This model that I've seen with the Center on Nonviolent communication tends to be one of the cleaner and I feel the most comfortable with in schools. I'm going to kind of outline that for you, but let me give you an example of not being formal about this. When my dad was a high school teacher for 42 years in Fresno, California, and he would always tell us stories, you know, about students and things that happened. And I remember maybe I was in college at the time or something, and he said that he always had this spot that he would talk to the students. He would walk outside his office, or a little quad out there, and it was like on a planter bed. And he felt more comfortable if a kid said, "Hey, can I talk to you, Mr. Clements?" And he would sit on that, and then a girl or a guy, and he just felt comfortable. And so they'd sit, but in relative private conversation. So this kid was being horrible, you know, cussing in class, talking rudely to my dad. It was bad. Using to work. And my dad quietly went over to him and he said, I'll just say John. He said, "John, this isn't like you. What's going on?" And he could say John's way too upset. So after class, he said, "Hey, come, let's go sit down." So they went out. They sat on this little planter. And he said, "John, it's just not like you. What's going on?" Well, it kind of was like John, right? We all know that, but this was a level above. And my dad wanted to get to the heart of it. And I think he just had a feeling this kid maybe needed to say something. And so this kid starts crying right there in the middle of like a 2,000 kid campus. And he's telling my dad how his girlfriend's pregnant and she's getting an abortion and there's nothing he can do about it. And he is just beside himself. And of course, my dad doesn't have answers for that, and such big adult problems for young people. But that's the type of heart-to-heart we're talking about now. I'm not talking about you having to like come up with this really complicated formula that you're going to see here without thinking about it first. Sometimes just correcting kids' behavior, we're better off not using a lot of words and just stopping the behavior, asking them, "What's the expectation?" The expectation is you work in your group quietly, right? Please do that. That's fine. This is when you feel like you need to have a conversation, you need to think about it first. So what I like about nonviolent communication, it was from the 1960s, even predates restorative practices coming to the US. And really from a group that you can still take trainings, they're international, really seeking peace worldwide with some of these really fantastic strategies. So simple enough, 4 parts to a sentence. The first thing you say in a statement, an affective statement, would be a factual observation that no one could argue with. So it might be something like, I see 3 pieces of paper on the floor, right? Can't argue, there they are, right? And then you name the emotion that it makes you feel. And you're not being judgy, right? You're just saying, that makes me feel frustrated, and I just cleaned the floor. And then you state a need that you had. And now not everyone has the same needs. You just need to let the kids know what need you have. I have a need for an orderly space to work in. Right? So that's why you felt frustrated. And then you just a really clear request and specific. Could I ask you two to pick those up right now? Or could I ask someone to pick that up in the next couple minutes? You can make a clear, specific request. Now that's very low level, and you're probably not going to use this type of organized thing for something small like that. But the idea here is that people can't argue with something that's factual. I'm also not being judgy. I'm not saying there's paper on the floor again, right? They're not going to argue with the way I feel. I'm just saying how I feel. I'm not saying how we all feel. And they also can't really argue with a need that I have, right? That I have a need for a certain space. And if we don't have that need, then we need to talk about it because we're a community and we need to get along. And maybe I need to give in an area or they need to give in an area. And then when you request, you can ask specifically for you want, or you can also ask the kids, would you be willing to consider blank? I've even used, would you consider thinking about this? And then talking about it later, if it's something serious. And I've also heard, instead of a request, possible, that I was from another school psychologist, what she would do is the observation, feeling, and need. And then she would say, you know, because I have a need for order, what do you need? And just ask the kid, what do you need? You know, maybe there's something on that we don't know about. So that's how it works. So let me show you how it would play out. So here's an example. For the past 3 days, we've had 5 to 7 people late, right? Observable, I can look down at my grade book, I can see it. That makes me feel frustrated and afraid because I value learning and anticipation. Okay, let's try another one. Today, during the math lesson, there were 8 interruptions and it distracted me, and I made some mistakes. That made me feel embarrassed because I have a need for competence. I got that from my math teacher, high school husband. We came up with that one today. That happens, right? So those are 2 examples. And so to aid you in this, I have made a sentence frame. And I designed this before in a previous school district, and we made posters and we put them up in classrooms so that teachers could use these. So whenever they were starting to feel something, you know, they'd look at it and the kids would know, oh, she's going over to the poster. We know, you know, that she's going to say something. So I notice blank. Remember, it's observable, no argument. We see it, right? I feel, share your feeling, what it is, because I have a need or a value. I value blank, or I have a need of something, and then put that in there. And then you say, would you consider blank, right? So there's 4 parts to it. And it is helpful. We're going to do an activity. I'm going to do a list from the Nonviolent Communication Center of needs and feelings. Not that, you know, a very vocabulary. We say we're mad, sad, glad, right? And kids have an even smaller vocabulary for emotions. So sometimes pinning down the exact feeling you have is really powerful. And then the needs. So one thing I want you to notice when I give you the list, because I always get questions, is people want to say, I feel disrespected. Well, respect is not a feeling, it's a need. So you might feel embarrassed, like that math teacher did. You might feel sad, frustrated, right? There's a lot of different feelings, but you didn't disrespect it because you have a need for respect. So this is the frame. So let me play it out a couple of times here. Okay, John, I noticed when I reminded you to stop talking and begin work, you threw a ball of paper and you hit Melissa in the head. I feel frustrated and I feel tired because I need participation and teamwork. And I could say, what do you need? Or would you consider getting started? And you might find out, what do you need? And he needs a pencil, right? You don't know. So sometimes it's nice to ask. Here's another one. I notice when we partner read, the same people are left without a partner. I feel sad and disappointed because in our class, we value inclusion, teamwork, and community. And you can only say this if you've been doing community circles and you've been talking about values. You can't just say, we value this because you value it. If you've established it as a community, then you can say that because they'll see right through that. And then I'd say, maybe, would you consider coming up with a plan so this doesn't happen anymore? So this is an example of using this for a whole class. So that's definitely possible too. All right. If you have a kid and you want to kind of help them get to that point and you want to reflect back a feeling, this is that validation. Remember, this is the part that makes people calm down. So if you're listening to a kid and they're just telling you everything that's going on and they're upset, listen for any words that are feeling words, needs, or values, and then reflect it back to the student. And then I gave you a couple sentence starters. So what your feeling is, or what you're saying is. So what you think is this, is that right? So you felt frustrated? Yeah, I'd be frustrated too. That kind of thing is powerful with an upset student. You actually could do this with a student that seems upset and help them through. I noticed, John, that you crumpled your paper and put your head on your desk, right? That could happen. Are you feeling, and then just, you could say, what are you feeling? You could ask, are you feeling overwhelmed with this assignment? See if they answer. Do you need space, some time, or do you need some support from me? Let them answer. Would you consider letting me help you with this? Right? So you could help walk a kid through this. Here's just a little list of like the feelings words, that we often, these are just a few. I'm going to give like 100. And these are some needs words. So when we think about, you may be feeling afraid, you may be feeling tense, annoyed, and it's because of unmet needs, right? That's why we have those feelings. It's not necessarily directly linked to their behavior. They didn't make you feel that way, but their behavior didn't meet a need for sure. So that's why we try to do that. One powerful example of this with needs and unmet needs was I recently ran a very large circle with about 30 to 40 people at a high school. And we were talking about the bathroom. And the bathroom had been vandalized all year long. As soon as they would put up new sinks and new soap dispensers, they would get ripped down. There was graffiti, there was vaping. There even was a big house party in there where they brought music and they were dancing, and it was only in the boys' bathroom. And the school tried everything. They taught PBIS lessons, like how to behave in the bathroom. They were positive. They monitored. They stood outside. They even asked some kids to help monitor. They tried a lot, and it just continued. So I ran a circle, a restorative circle, which you're going to learn how to do later. And the circle was a needs circle because apparently there were some unmet needs in the community because we didn't know why this was happening. And we sat in the circle. We included the custodians, someone from maintenance, the administrators, a teacher, kids that we knew had been involved, but we didn't even know who exactly. And then kids that were impacted, like when the bathroom kept getting shut down. And we went around the circle and we were able to hear needs that were being unmet at the school. Some kids were embarrassed, like how bad the school looked and how dirty it was. Some people just wanted more fun at school, thus the house party, like more activity. They had a serious drop off in activities. Some people were just mad at the adults, didn't feel heard or listened to. I mean, it was really varied. Tears, we had like some kids listening to other kids who were impacted. It was really powerful. After having that circle, the problems have really subsided, like largely subsided. And so that is an example of just letting people talk about what they need. Even though we haven't really been able to do a lot to fix and address their needs, just talking about it is incredibly powerful. So all that to say, needs matter. And your unmet needs can drive you to have a lot of feelings and behaviors. So we're going to do a nonviolent communication sentence frame, and we're going to be working on them in pairs. So what we're going to do is I want you to just take a minute. I want you to think about a situation in your own classroom or your school, and I'm going to give you a minute. Think about a situation that either happens regularly, it's serious enough for you that you'd bother making a sentence frame, and maybe something that may happen again too, so you could actually use it. So just take a second and think about that. Okay, now that you have it, what we're going to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms. And the first thing is I've given you a list of feelings and needs. And I'm going to send them to you now. This is a tool you're going to need. It has the feelings and needs list. And then it also has the sentence frame, so you can practice. All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and leave this meeting. You're going to go there, and I will be sending you the link to come right back here when in your group. So we're just going to take 5 minutes to talk a little bit with that person about what you would like to write your sentence frame for, and then we'll come back and share. All right, go ahead and go.